Okay, so we're gonna kind of land the plane here, but we see how much pain this myth can bring into a marriage on an individual level, in the actual coupleship itself. But let's look at it from the perspective of like pastors, parents, churches. How can we make sure that we're not perpetuating this myth and we're not teaching it and we're really revealing a couple different things? One, what marriage actually is and what sex is, and then also what breaking free from compulsive sexual behavior actually is. So what can we do to help not perpetuate this myth?
Yeah, Trevor, I think it begins with an open and authentic conversation. And that can be extremely challenging. In the home, it can be challenging, but hopefully that's where it begins at a pretty early age with our youth. And we're talking about God's design for sexuality because we know if the as the adversary gets in there, he's taking us off point. So we want to guide our children well and being real with them. Um, And I believe our kids want open and honest communication. They may not say, yeah, bring it on, mom, bring it on, dad. But I think they desire that and need it. And just to provide guidance and clarity as they move forward, in their early years, because we know that the producers of pornography, they target those young folks. 8 to 12 years old is typically the primary target market. And if we can reach those young people and begin the conversation about healthy sexuality, we'll help them out. I think that's what we're called to do as well.
Yeah, I was thinking along the same lines of prohibition versus provision. That if in the church or in our homes, we only focus on the prohibition of like, God said, no, don't do this. This is wrong. This is dirty. Outside of marriage, it's bad. And then, our young people grow up and they're ready for marriage. And now we kind of give them a thumbs up like, well, okay, now it's all good. Go have fun. And make an assumption that they're just going to figure it all out when all we've ever told them is no, 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 don't. And I think a lot of people can then feel inhibited in their sexuality in the marriage because they haven't really been taught the provision of God's goodness and God's plan and how God made our bodies to work. And you read the Song of Solomon in the Old Testament, and 3,000 years ago they didn't bat an eye about using pretty graphic description of physical intimacy that I think was intended to help prepare people in that engagement season for physical intimacy in their marriage. And so that there was a provision of God's goodness and God's plan and an understanding of it's not just all going to be easy or get better or your problems don't go away. Like, do we talk through these things, or do we fall into that mindset of thinking, well, my job as a parent or pastor is just to keep people from bad choices, and then just expect they'll figure out the good choices on their own. And that's, I think, the way of thinking that perpetuates some of these myths, because no one's really talked through the alternative of how do I stay healthy? How do I discipline my mind? How do I make good choices so that I can enjoy the provision that God has for me in the kind of marriage he created and intended? I just think creating environments of conversation, where people know, our children know, I'm someone they can talk to about the good and the bad, and that at the moment of engagement, I don't just step back and then hope they figure it out, because honestly, a lot of those young people then are turning to the internet and advice columns and having to read up on sexual tips from, magazines versus like, well, why can't an educated parent who loves them talk a little bit about some strategies and like, here's what makes for good physical intimacy. I think if that kind of conversation, we saw that as more spiritual, that's part of discipleship, like that would go a long ways to helping people fall into this myth and then get disillusioned or disappointed when their marriage didn't make everything better like they thought it would. So yeah, just creating those environments, I think, is huge.
Totally. I think the only thing I'd add is hot take. Stop putting marriage on a pedestal from a church perspective, that it is like the culmination of becoming a Christian and the peak and the pinnacle and whatever. It's like, think about what Paul said, that like, don't get married. It makes life a little bit simpler. You can maybe be more effective in ministry. Not to diminish at all it's the picture of the relationship of Christ and the church in Scripture. So obviously God values marriage significantly. But I think that in our overemphasis on marriage, it can set single people up to think that it is the solution to many of our problems. And so I think that that's just a practical way, to have single people minded, like have that be something that you're mindful of in your communication. yeah, I just think not putting it on a pedestal could also be pretty helpful.